Share screen. Okay, so we're going to do this one here. And you should see my PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And then let me go to full screen from the beginning. There we go. We'll minimize that. Let me move this up here. Okay, so a lot of what's keeping me occupied, at least at the federal level, or at least nationwide, has to do with proposed bans on the use of natural gas. Right. When I say bans on natural gas, that means that disconnections from existing construction or major renovations, bans on connections and new construction. It's been going on all over the country. There was a recent debate on this in North Carolina at the end of last year. So I'd like to touch on that for a little bit because it's such a big deal for us. And then I'm going to do my shameful plug for the legislative conference. So we'll start with the timeline real quick. This has been going on since about April of 2019. What happened was in the Northeast, specifically in the New York City area, the utility provider there, National Grid, had bumped heads with the Cuomo administration, which is probably something you don't want to do. But there was an expansion of the Williams pipeline that was proposed that would go across, South Long Island Bay. It would extend into Queens, Brooklyn, down into Long Island, so that you could have additional natural gas supplies for customers that want to connect. You have a lot of old infrastructure in that part of the state. So you have people that are making, they're basing their businesses on, doing residential boilers as well as commercial, right? And also doing oil to gas conversions as well. And so National Grid was hoping that they could get that extension of the Williams pipeline, so that they could start servicing more people. Cuomo administration and Governor Murphy in New Jersey had said no. And so what happened was that National Grid said, we can't accommodate new customers. And so they stopped doing new connections. And that was quite a problem. So we learned in July that it tied into a bigger issue of municipal governments wanting to outright ban the use of natural gas in order to move to a fully electric power grid that's powered by solar panels and nuclear and windmills and renewables and pixie dust. And so you have a lot of utilities and energy companies. They're saying, well, we don't really have the grid capacity for this. But regardless, starting in July 2019, Berkeley, California, of course, first municipality to ban natural gas connections in new construction. You had about 24 more municipalities in California follow suit. San Francisco tried it recently. They looked into it and determined that it just wouldn't be feasible, which was kind of mind-blowing. I guess broken clock is right twice a day, right? So nonetheless, PHCC was alerted to this problem in September 2019. I was still pretty new on the job. We were just coming off, a licensing crisis in Texas. And of course, I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around how the industry works. And so this was kind of the first big major issue for me to deal with, and definitely had gotten smart on this pretty quickly. November 2019, Governor Cuomo threatens to lift National Grid's charter if they don't start doing new gas connections. So they agreed that rather than extending the Williams pipeline, that they would just ship in natural gas supplies by rail and by truck, which, if the irony is not lost on you, requires a significant amount of diesel power in order to move all of that supply, into southern New York. Brookline, Massachusetts, July 2020, wants to be another municipality to ban natural gas. However, it was illegal for them to do that. It requires an act of the state legislature. The Massachusetts Plumbing Board came out in opposition to gas bans. And then February 2020, Arizona was the first state to initiate what's called fuel choice. And what that means is that it prohibits local governments and municipal governments in the state from instituting a ban on natural gas in new construction or existing construction. And so that way, people still have that choice. If they want to go fully to heat pump technology in their home, there's nothing getting in the way of stopping them. If they want to keep their natural gas connection, or they want to do oil to gas conversion, if they want to connect to natural gas, they have that choice too. And then September 2021, we start seeing their tactics change a little bit with the opposition. Now they're going after building codes and urging states to go for fully electric building codes. And so Washington State had, and the Code Council had debated this last fall. And when that was passed and it went to the state legislature shot it down because the UA and PHCC of Washington State teamed up with other stakeholders to push back in the legislature and say this is not feasible. Winters here get pretty cold, especially in eastern Washington State in the mountains, and people need natural gas because heat pump technology is not going to cut it when the temperatures go below 40 degrees. And then November, you'll probably recall that the state legislature had in North Carolina had passed a similar fuel choice bill, similar to what was passed in Arizona and 19 other states. That bill was vetoed by Governor Cooper. And so, this is probably something that's not going to go away. And I want to make sure that PHCC of North Carolina is aware that this is something that is going to come up again. You got a call to action went out where you filled in your names and you automatically sent letters to your state legislators, and roughly half of your chapter had responded to that, which is actually a really good response rate. I think we had 47 members had responded to that call to action to Governor Cooper, telling him to just leave the bill alone and let it become law. Not even asking him to sign it, just leave it alone, let it become law. And he didn't. He went ahead and he had to veto it. And then your neighbors, okay, then December 2021, I'll go into this. New York City actually instituted a full out ban on natural gas beginning in July 2023. And that, unless something happens, that's going to become law. So I'll touch on that later in the presentation. Fuel choice bill was introduced in Virginia. And that was, it passed the House. It passed the House of Delegates. It was amended in the Senate in a very bad way, and so the bill had to die. And I'll go into details on that in a little bit as well. State of Maryland had proposed electrifying government buildings. That instead became a study, which is not a bad thing. I like studies. I'd rather that a study at the very least buys us time, anywhere from 18 months to 2 years. And then it also gives the government an opportunity to actually collect the facts and hopefully, change their mind and see what they're really getting into. And then, of course, March 2022, a big deal for PHCC. The New York governor was going to include gas bans in the budget. And as you know, when it comes to government budgets, this is must-pass legislation. And so we were successful in getting those provisions stricken from the budget. And now this month, Connecticut is on the verge of instituting some kind of ban. They're probably not gonna, they're up against the deadline. Their legislature is scheduled to adjourn sometime this week. But even if nothing happens now, it's definitely gonna come up again next year. So this is where
Can I interrupt for a quick question, Mark?
Of course, please.
So in all these places where they're doing the ban of gas, replacing with electric, are they also getting rid of all of their gas power plants?
So that's what New York wants to do.
Wow. Okay.
So but you bring up a good point, right? In states where they just want homes to be electrified, nobody's asking the question, well, where is the power coming from, right? So yeah, it's coming from nuclear, it's coming from hydro, but it's also coming from natural gas and from coal, right? So what are you doing there when you're electrifying homes? You're shifting that power burden to the power plants, right? So those power plants are working harder, ergo, they're generating more CO2 emissions. So all they're doing is really just shifting. They're just shifting where the pollution is coming from and concentrating it when you think about it. So so this is a map of where we've seen gas bans, right, in blue, where they've been proposed at some level or passed. The red states are the states that have instituted fuel choice legislation. The pinkish states are the ones where they're considering it. And then the state like Colorado, it's going both ways. They're considering some bans, and some local governments are considering bans, and other governments are considering fuel choice. So Colorado is a mixed bag. But if you look at this map, and then you look at this map, go back and forth. So this is the gas ban map, and then this is the 2020 election outcome map. So as you can see, there's a bit of overlay, right? So obviously it's a very politically driven issue. States that are generally blue states are states that are more likely to adopt this kind of legislation, whereas red states are states that are going to push back and adopt fuel choice. Texas obviously is going to be that state. It's a major oil producer, and so they're going to institute a fuel choice bill. Arizona is kind of the outlier, but then you also want to keep in mind that Trump had lost that state by only about 2 percentage points or so. So it was a very narrow margin of victory. Nonetheless, I'll tell the story of New York real quick. So the governor had proposed a natural gas ban in new construction and in major renovations. All right, where if you're undergoing a major renovation, whether it's a kitchen renovation or some kind of building envelope renovation, that you would have to disconnect from natural gas. And then on top of that, there was another provision that would have taken away subsidies provided by utilities to help customers connect the natural gas for the first 100 feet of pipe from the service line to the dwelling. And so both of those provisions were removed, because a number of reasons. Number one, we went through a lot of work to raise consumer awareness about this, because a lot of this is happening under the radar. If you were to ask your customers whether or not they were aware this is happening, they would probably tell you no. And if they like their natural gas connection, they would probably be appalled by this. And so, we had worked very hard to raise public awareness in New York. We teamed up with the UA and with the utilities. We teamed up with state Senate Republicans to bring attention to the issue and put significant amount of pressure on Governor Hochul to take the amendments out. And we succeeded, right? But we won the battle. We didn't win the war, because New York State now has a Climate Action Council. They're having these public information sessions around the state to get input from taxpayers, and then they're going to compile their report at the end of the year. And it's not really a secret that they've already had their mind made up about where they want to go with natural gas. So, we're doing our best to sort of influence that process as well. New York is a big problem for us, because, New York is one of those states like California, where if they adapt something like this, other states are going to follow, right? So we want to try to do as much as we can to stop that process. What does New York City's gas ban look like? And I think we have 1 more minute. But essentially, buildings less than 7 stories won't be able to connect the new construction won't be able to connect the gas beginning in January 2023. Anything more than 7 stories, July 2027, right? That means skyscrapers. And the reason why that's the case is because during the New York City Council meeting, you had a subject matter expert who sort of spitballed and said, look, heat pump technology is not quite there yet for large buildings and for skyscrapers. We'll probably get there in about 5 years. And so the New York City Council said, okay, fine. In that case, for tall buildings, that this ban is going to go into effect in 2027. We expect that the technology is going to be there. So they made a major policy decision based on some subject matter expert spitballing, right? Just giving a rough estimate. And so that kind of gives you a sense of how aggressive our opponents are in pushing for these types of policy changes. Number of exemptions, the ones that stand out for me, where the primary use is by utility to generate electric power or steam, right? School construction, if the application is submitted by December 2024, facilities that are treating sewage and food waste, laboratories, laundromats, hospitals, crematoriums, I hope, and commercial kitchens. So it's almost like you need natural gas in some applications. So this is what New York statewide ban would look like. And then, of course, North Carolina's the fuel choice bill introduced in March. It passed the legislature in November. We went to call to action December 2nd, 47 responses. Thank you, North Carolina. Governor Cooper vetoed on December 6th. And so I did a screenshot here. I'm on a mailing list of a coalition that is pushing for building electrification. Because I want to know what the other side is up to. And so I noticed that they had this webinar that happened on April 14th. And I noticed that the first name there at the top of the list, who was one of the hosts, is Governor Cooper. So he is all in on this. And then, Congresswoman Ross as well. And then other people from the transit and corporate side. So, this is something to consider. Other states in Connecticut, the gas bans are going to be on the calendar. Probably not going to go anywhere in the next day or two before the legislature adjourns. That bill bans not just connections and new construction or major renovation. It also prohibits the sale of electric resistance heat products as well. So a contractor wouldn't even be able to offer a more affordable alternative to their customers. It's either heat pumps or nothing. Sioux Falls, South Dakota had proposed a similar climate action plan, and it was soundly defeated. Because if you look at the demographics of that state, the demographics have exploded because of oil and gas exploration. And then in Idaho, they passed a law that said that building codes cannot be amended. All right, so they implement the ICC. No municipalities can add or take away from that. Like, that is your building code, and you're going to stick with it. And what that does is that will prevent a municipal government from trying to work in electrification into their building codes. Works in Idaho. I don't know if it's going to work in other states. New Jersey, where 80% of residences are powered by natural gas, you have a fuel choice bill and a bill that would ban natural gas. So I anticipate, in the near future, New Jersey is going to be another battleground for us. Rhode Island is setting up an infrastructure bank that would fund the decommissioning of natural gas infrastructure. And essentially give money to utilities to help do that. Virginia, HB 1257, that was the fuel choice bill. What happened there was that the House of Delegates passed that bill, went to the Senate, and it was heavily amended to say that if a utility is going to disconnect service, they have 3 years to do it. They have to give public notice, and they have to make a good faith effort to sell the utility to someone who's going to continue service. So that's not exactly what we wanted out of the bill. It buys a little bit of time, but that's about it. And there's nothing that prohibits a local government from instituting a ban. Where I live in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia is something that the Board of Supervisors here is seriously considering. So even I'm a little worried about it. Maryland, again, they wanted to go with all electric state buildings, but instead they took out that requirement and they're just going to do a study. Oregon and Washington State attempts to attack the building code and work in electrification language there, or essentially mandating stretch codes are still under consideration. So what did we learn? So far, I've learned that exemptions are going to eliminate key opposition, right? So in New York City, you see these exemptions for crematoriums, for restaurants, for utilities, and these are very powerful political players, right? Especially the National Restaurant Association in a market like Manhattan. Since they're taken care of, they have no reason to put pressure on legislators, so they're out. All right, and then believe it or not, funeral directors also have. There's a National Funeral Directors Association. They have a lobbying staff in Washington D.C. They have a very strong state presence. Exempting crematoriums takes them out of the picture as well. So that's something to be mindful of. Our opponents, if they lose or if they don't get what they want, they're going to go to the state code committees and try to get it that way. Our opponents are going to try to go to the state utility boards like they did in Connecticut, where you had the Attorney General file a complaint with the utility in Connecticut, stating that you need to end subsidies for connecting homes to natural gas. And those homes are doing oil to gas conversions. So you take away that incentive, those homes all right, they're not going to shell out $6,000 just to connect the natural gas and then buy a furnace on top of that. So they're going to stick with the oil burning furnace. So, are they really helping by preventing people from connecting to natural gas? Because what happens there? Then, with natural gas is a cleaner burning fuel. They stick with oil, they're burning oil. And then on top of that, those delivery trucks, they're class B, diesel powered trucks that probably weigh easily 30,000 pounds with a full load, driving around door to door, burning diesel, delivering heating oil. So, why, if you want a cleaner environment, why wouldn't you want to help homes at least connect to natural gas? So it just kind of underscores the all or nothing approach that our opponents are taking on this issue. One thing I've learned is that state plumbing boards can be a valuable ally. If they're opposed to it, they're generally pretty well respected in their states as entities that protect the public health. And so, generally, if you're having an issue with this, you go to the state plumbing board, and the state plumbing board will probably, issue a letter like they did in Massachusetts, stating that they're opposed to gas bans and outlining why it's a bad idea. I've learned that there's strength in numbers, like in New York, teaming up with other people, teaming up with the unions, teaming up with utilities, with fuel companies, and raising consumer awareness is something that will help move the needle, absolutely. Fuel choice legislation, I think, is the backstop we need. That's the one thing that's going to stop local governments from instituting these bans, and we need to get fuel choice passed in any state where it's possible, North Carolina being one of them. Consumer awareness overall is critical. They're not aware of this. They're not aware that this is going on. You need to be able to, you need to feel comfortable talking with your customers about this, because it's going to be a real issue in North Carolina. It's good to lay the groundwork now. And then, of course, the one thing we want to really understand here is that the proponents of gas bans are legion. They're all over the place. They're well funded. They have ways of injecting their people into any public conversation on this issue. And they will tell you everything. The world is falling. They'll tell you that, heat pumps work great in any kind of weather, that we're sounding with people that are opposed to gas bans are pretending like the world is coming to an end. So that's one thing that we need to be prepared to fight back against that as well. So that's obviously, it's going to be an issue for a legislative conference as well. Definitely something. I don't think this is going to fall on deaf ears if we go to the Democrats. So I think it's a good midterm election issue for Republicans. So I would encourage you to bring it up with Republican offices. And then in terms of workforce, we had touched on this as well. We want robust funding. Talk about the experiences that you have with your apprentices, why it's important to have some kind of a tax break or some kind of financial incentive for employers that are paying for apprentices, especially with their, when they're getting paid for classroom time. And then on supply chain, we had a big conversation there. So I'll leave the QR code up. Please scan it, register for the conference. Early bird registration ends tomorrow. And we'd love to see a strong showing from PHCC of North Carolina. We have a lot going on. We got a lot of momentum going on in our advocacy efforts, and I'd hate to see that effort slow down. So we need a strong showing this year at our Ledge conference. It's going to be virtual this year. This is going to be the last year we do it virtual. Next year it's going to be in person as Capitol Hill starts lifting restrictions. But until then, we're just going to have to stick with the virtual platform for now. We did it last year. It was pretty easy to use. It worked out well. And I got a lot of positive feedback from it. So anyway, I went 9 minutes over. I'm very sorry about that. But if anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns, anything they'd like to share, please let me know.
I've got a ton of questions. So, I mean, all you're doing is offsetting the energy. You're just moving it from gas to electric. But I mean, I could only imagine being a business in one of these states, they're banning gas. If you've got to move over to heat pumps, if you get a demand charge like a commercial business, I know that I could use less energy this month than I used last month. But if my peak demand charge goes higher than a certain kilowatt hour, they could hit me with huge sums of money. So you're talking about massive increases in cost. And I'm sure the energy infrastructure grid would have to go through some major updating. I mean, isn't this just like an unmitigated disaster if it happens?
Yeah, it's not something I want to find out the hard way. But look, our opponents on this issue, they're not really listening to anything that we have to say. They're basing their stuff off of scientific studies, which I'm sure have some level of legitimacy. But at the same time, a lot of those studies, they get funding from somewhere, right? And in order to attract funding, they need to make it sound like the world is coming to an end. And so that's kind of how they generate their funding for these studies. But other than that, you can try to explain this to someone who wants to ban natural gas, and it's not going to resonate with them. They're just not going to believe you, no matter what.
Is there some materials that have already been developed that our contractor members can have the option of sending to their customers, consumers?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I can do is I can do a call, so what I did for New York was I drafted a call to action, packaged it up in a link, all right, but that was for them to send to their customers. And I got a pretty good response. I think it got somewhere around 200-300 responses, right, where the customer clicked on the link and sent it to their legislators in Albany. So I'm happy to do something similar for you, and I can send you the link, and you can send it to your members, and then your members can share it with their customers. And then if you prefer, if this is something that you want to share outside of PHCC, which I would highly recommend, because this is an all hands on deck approach, I can package up that call to action so that it doesn't have a PHCC logo on it. So that if you wanted to send it to a non-PHCC contractor and have them send it out to their customers as well, and that might also be a good way for you to help recruit new members as well.
So in New York, you've got very cold temperatures, especially in upstate.
Yes.
And the colder it gets, the less efficient those heat pumps become. I mean, you say there's a scientific study done. I just don't even see how that's possible. You get temperatures down in the single digits and you're trying to run on heat pumps, and they're not, I mean, you'd have to have a massive number of these heat pumps in order to meet demand without using just straight up electrical.
So then they have backup systems, and guess what those backup systems are powered by?
Natural gas.
Or oil. Oil's still very popular in the Northeast.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of oil around us too, but natural gas is just so much cleaner and easier to deal with, less maintenance, you name it.
Less maintenance, yeah.
I don't know. Let New York do it, and then they can be the test subjects, and we can all laugh and watch.
You know what? At this point, that's kind of how my attitude has evolved. It's like, you know what? Let these people freeze for a couple of winters, and then come back to me and tell me that this was such a great idea. So. But the
feel bad for the New Yorkers, but my gosh. Yeah,
the problem is, Mark, is that when something like this happens, all right, who's the first person that a customer is going to call when their heat's not working? They're going to call their state legislator, or they're going to call their contractor, right? Mark, Mark Gonzalez raised his hand. They're going to call him, and then be like, hey, what the hell? You sold me this heat pump, it's not working. I need you to come and service it. Or when you go to try to do a conversion, say, well, you're doing a major renovation, I can't connect you to gas anymore, it's got to be a heat pump. Oh, and by the way, we're going to have to upgrade your electrical panel as well, which is something that I don't do. That will cost you about $6 to $8 grand. And then, by the way, your gas stove is not going to work, so you're going to have to get an electric stove. And you had a gas dryer too. Oh, well, yeah, you're going to have to replace that, and your water heater too. And for average home in New York, that's about $28,000 right there, 28 to 30 grand. So I imagine North Carolina's not going to be that much lower. Still going to be a lot of money. So that's where consumer awareness comes into play. That's where you need to raise awareness. And the thing is that you guys are probably making a killing selling heat pumps. But at the same time, what about the people there where the bulk of their business is oil to gas conversions, or the bulk of their business is boilers, right? What's going to happen to them? And it's not like they made a decision. The reason why they're doing that work is because that's what the market dictates. And so now you're saying like a government decree is just going to wipe out that market. you know, rather than the market working its natural course. You sort of see this with electric cars. You know, the market is starting to shift more towards like electric and towards hybrid. You know, and eventually it'll get to that point. You know, but you have California that's going to outright ban the sale of gas-powered cars. So, you know, what happens there? You're going to have people not going to want to sell their cars because they can't get a new gas-powered car. You know, and who's going to get impacted the most? If people can't afford a new car, you know, and then, you know, what happens is that, you know, demand for fuel is going to drop. And then, you know, and then they're going to get stuck with higher fuel prices. There's so much, it's just, so it's a problem. So, you know, I'm doing my best to advocate for you guys. It's important for you to be aware of it. It's important for you to tell your customers. And of course, it's important for you to share your concerns with Congress as well. Because, you know, I imagine that everything that I've said is resonating. I don't think there's anyone on the call that wants to see a ban on natural gas, just for practical purposes alone, but also because of the impact they could probably have on your business as well.
Thank you, Mark.
So May 24th and 25th is your opportunity to share your concerns with Congress. So I hope you take advantage of that. But anyway, does anyone else have any other questions?
I have a statement.
Okay, please.
If you guys are interested in the legislative side of things, we do have a legislative action team for North Carolina. Kobe on our board actually chairs that group. And really, they're conversations like this and opportunities to work with our, you know, local lobbyists here to really have our voice heard and to be represented well in the state. So I would encourage you to be involved in that locally. And then, of course, like Mark said, join us for the event coming up next month.